Right, hello there. So today's video, impromptu, irregularly scheduled video, is about poses because the Flash sticker for creating poses, Deliverance's Flash sticker, is dead because Adobe has now terminated. Let's just bring the end of. They have now terminated Flash. So any web-based website or web browser-based use of Flash is no longer going to work. So that means, let's pause that. That means that Deliverance's Flash sticker no longer works. So the only alternative, if you want to make poses now, is to use the pose files that come with Blender, or the pose files for Blender. So you can download those. So what we're going to do, what we're going to do is just go over the pose file, creating a simple pose and then exporting it using Blender. So let me just. Right, so what you want, where are the files? Right, for IMVU to create poses now then, because Flash is no longer available, you want some pose files, starter files, that we can use with Blender. And this is what you'll end up with in Blender, is this. So let me just get that back up. So there are a couple of downloads. There's lots of information about how you use the pose file. But we'll just do a video on creating a simple static pose and getting that into IMVU. So here are the starter files. So we've got the avatar starter files. That will include all the avatar-based starter files. So that's for clothing, accessories, poses, and face morphs. They're all contained in one zip file. We have this alternative pose starter file, which is this one that looks very similar to Deliverance's sticker. Room starter file and furniture starter file. So those are incidental to this because we're just going over poses. But a lot of information about how you use poses are available on this page. So that is catsbits.com/codex/IMVU-starter-files. Or if you just go to Blender IMVU, and then that'll give you a link to downloading the starter files. So that's where you can get them from. But I'll drop that in chat. Make sure that this is all working. Double check. Facebook puts videos as private by default for some reason, so I have to change all of that. Right, so so go to that page, download the zip files. If you're using Windows, you should be able to disgorge. You should be able to what's the word? Not decompress. Extract. That's the word I was looking for. You should be able to extract the files by default because Windows 10 includes the ability to look inside the contents of zip files as if they are just an ordinary folder on your system. So that shouldn't be too much of an issue. But once you've got that, once you've got the files extracted, what you want to be doing is just double click on Blender to start it. And you'll be faced with this. So this is your basic interface. So to move the 3D view around, we've got we can do that with the mouse, middle mouse button. So middle mouse click hold and that will rotate. Or if you find that very clunky, what you can do is use this little colored axes thing here. So if you left click on the highlighted area, left click drag, that will allow you to rotate the view as well. So this will come in handy when we want to move around the avatar so that we can pose it. We've also got additional controls. We've got zoom and then we've got pan. So zoom, again, left click hold drag and that zooms in and out, and left click hold on the hand icon and that pans. Now all these controls, I don't think Deliverance's sticker had these zoom and pan. Don't remember off the top of my head, but it certainly had rotate. So that's all you're doing is just rotating around the scene. So we don't need to worry too much about anything else on screen. So all we've got is the 3D view that we're going to focus on in the main. So this is where we're going to do most of our work. So either use your middle mouse button, shift middle mouse to pan, control middle mouse to zoom, or just use the widget in the corner here, left click drag, and that will do the same sort of thing. Might take a bit of getting used to, but you'll get there eventually. So once you've got that, once you've got the file downloaded, extracted, this is what you're looking at by default. So what we want to do then, just going to clear the view. What we want to do then is just load in the starter file. So as with ordinary other applications, we can do that from the File menu, File, Open, and that will take us to a folder browser or a computer browser where we have our hard drives if we've got multiples, system, and this is the usual as it's showing there, home, desktop, documents, depending on where you have your how you have your computer set up by default, you'll have documents, downloads, music, pictures, the classic icon, not the icons, the classic folders that are presented or available to each user of the computer. We'll have favorites, so these are things that you bookmark. These aren't in use. And then you'll have your recent list. And this is the one that you probably use the most, which shows your most recent files that you've been accessing. So this browses the main computer. And then once you've chosen a location, on this side, you have the contents of that location. So for your folder, in this case, is just a desktop. So what we want to do here, where is the file? We want female 04. So that's this one. So we want female 04 poses alternative. So we can select that, left click, open, and that'll drop that into place. Don't worry about just seeing the skeleton, because that's a graphical issue with the graphics card that I've got. And we can fix that, performance. So ordinarily this is what you'll see when you open the file. So if you did it that way, that's the normal way you'd do it. File, open, browse to the location, select the file and open. Alternatively, excuse Alternatively, depending on where you've extracted the files, by default it'll probably be the desktop. You can left click, drag, hold, and just drop it into place. Whoops. And we'll get the same thing again. So let me just fix that. So again, this is what you'll see by default. So what we've got is the avatar in white, no textures because they're not needed for this, and the skeleton. And the skeleton is similar to the one that's shown. Oh, it's going to crash on me again. Oh, we'll have to do this at a different time. Don't send. Exit. If you are using an AMD graphics card or computer with an AMD chipset, you may find this problem cropping up far too often. So let's do that again. So we just dragged and dropped that into place. Fix the bug. And then what we want to do before we do anything is make sure. It shouldn't be doing that actually at all. There we go, in front. So now you should be able to select the bones. So this is a bug that you have to be aware of if you use an AMD graphics card. So this doesn't necessarily make your learning how to make poses any easier. So this is what we have. Avatar represented by the white mesh and our skeleton. The skeleton is composed of or includes a number of bones. Each one represents a bone of the avatar in IMVU. So this is what we'll actually pose in the same way that we do with Deliverance's sticker. So you select a bone and manipulate it to create a pose. And whenever we do that, it drops a little marker into the timeline. So this is the timeline. So we've got the 3D view, and then we've got the timeline. So Deliverance's sticker also has a timeline as well, depending on how you are creating your pose. Can't open Deliverance's sticker now because Flash won't. Flash is dead. But it does the same thing. So Blender and Deliverance's sticker do the same thing. So you select a bone and you manipulate it, and in doing so it drops in one of these little markers, and depending on the bone that's selected, a marker will appear at that specific bone. So we have thigh selected, and already there are some markers in here by default for this specific pose with the avatar with their hands dropped down to their sides. And over a duration, or the duration being a timeline sequence, so that's our start and end points, we can drop in several of these to create a pose. So we've got at frame 1, frame 10 and frame 20. And that, in essence, is all a pose is. So we manipulate the bones the same way that we do in Deliverance's sticker. You select, manipulate using the widget. That drops in a keyframe. And for Blender, we have to do this sequence even for static poses. So we'll get to that later. So, to create an actual pose. So what we're going to do is change this pose. So this is one of the defaults that comes with the file that you can export to test the process. But all we're going to do is manipulate. Let's manipulate the shoulder now that we've got that selected. So to manipulate the bones, you get this little widget, manipulation widget, pop up. And it has several elements. So what we want is a rotate, really. So click that. And this gives us a number of axes that we can rotate the bone around. So the blue, back and forth, and do that. Red rotates around its length, I guess that would be. And then green, side to side. So those are fixed axes, but we've also got the white loop, and that rotates the bone relative to the view. And then we've also got this pale highlight. Don't know how clear that comes across in the video, but in this area, if you move the mouse into the widget, we get this white highlight. And if we click drag on that, it moves in multiple axes. So we've got red, green and blue for specific axes. We've got white that manipulates or rotates relative to the view. And then we've got this highlighted pale sphere that rotates in multiple axes. So the one thing you want to note is that, generally speaking, you can only rotate and move. We can't scale things in IMVU, so ignore this. So we can switch between the different types of manipulation by just clicking these icons. Most of the time it'll be rotate. So let's do a quick pose. So what we're going to do, we need to make sure that the timeline slider, so again left click drag, or you can left click, so left click drag, drop that at a key frame, so we've got this on frame 1, and then just pose. So select a bone. So that'll be right or left click depending on how you have your button selection set up. And then what we'll do is create a pose. So that's the shoulder, that's the elbow. All we're going to do is manipulate bones to create a pose. That's the hand, because the coof is quite topical at the moment. We'll create a cough pose. So we can see that given the position of the avatar, so we're looking at it more or less straight on, but the orientation widgets don't necessarily always align to the direction that we want to manipulate the bone. So this is why this white loop is provided, because that allows us to manipulate the bone relative to the view, so we can position the avatar and use this white loop to position the bone rather than using the axes of the bone itself. So this system is actually quite flexible because it allows us to do a lot of things that don't necessarily rely on the orientation of the bone itself, but rather the view as we are looking at it. So that's one. Let's grab that shoulder. That elbow. Oh, it's going to crash on me again. This is going to be very frustrating. Dagnabbit. We'll have to do that again. And this is one of the reasons why you are encouraged to create regular save points. So let's do that again. So again, we're using the middle mouse button to rotate around the view, but we can use the manipulation view thingy-majiggery, what's it in the corner there, does the same thing. So let's select our bone and do that all over again. But you can see that once you get used to how Blender works, you can actually create poses quite quickly. So that's all we're doing, is selecting individual bones. Let me save this, save as. So we're going to save this into a particular folder location, so we're using the same options and settings that we had before. So we are on our desktop, but we want to save this in avatars, so we select that folder, or we browse to it. So you click on data, for example, and that would then show you the list of folders available on your data hard drive, and then you just browse through as you would normally do with Windows. Coof pose and save. So we have at least a save point that we can go back to. So selecting shoulder, elbow, hand, whoops, make sure you don't slap the fingers. Put your hand over your mouth when you cough. Oh, and it's crashed again. So that's a graphics issue. So yes, if you're using AMD graphics cards or graphics chips, I'd have to be mindful of that. least we have a safe point to go back to. Recent open coof pose. So the the timeline scrubber is at frame 1 still. So let's see if we can get this into place before it crashes again. So to cough in your hand or the back of the hand. Whoops, that's the hand bone. We don't want the finger bone, we want the hand bone. So again, all we're doing, selecting individual bones using the widget to manipulate. And as we move and pose the bone, it's automatically dropping a marker into the timeline. If there's one already there, it'll override it. So if we move between the two poses, so these are the defaults that we had before. So this is the one that we've just created, and that's the default that we've overridden. And this was at frame 1, but that is now a custom pose. So that's our coof. And what we can do is in the outliner, we can hide the skeleton by clicking on this little eye icon, so we can see the avatar and all its glory. It looks like it's picking its nose. We don't want that, so unhide that. Move that back a bit. Still looks like it's picking its nose, which we don't want. And it still looks like it's picking its nose. So this is what you'll want to be doing, is just once you've got your basic pose in place, it's then just a question of tweaking the bones. So there we go. There we go. There's our coof pose. So let's save this. File, save as. Right, so that is our pose. So compared to Deliverance's sticker, it's pretty much exactly the same process. So we have a timeline. The sticker has a timeline. We have our pose, obviously, and that pose is dropping keyframes into the timeline at various keyframes. So for a static pose with Deliverance's sticker, that's all you would need to do. You could then export this as an XAF file. But for Blender, we have to do a couple of other things before we can do that. So what we want to do for a static pose is duplicate what we can see on screen. So we have to duplicate this pose into second keyframe, which is at frame 10. So we need to copy frame 1 to frame 10. So we can do this a number of ways, but the easiest is just to select all. That'll select all the bones. And then in the pose menu, pose, we want copy pose. That'll copy everything. That's just everything to do with the skeleton, that is the positions of the bones as we've created for the pose. Move the scrubber to frame 10. Back in the pose menu, we want paste pose. And that pastes the pose automatically, overriding whatever was there as the defaults. And then we can leave, for this to work in IMVU, we can leave frame 20 as it is, and this is called the reset pose, and this is needed for poses when we're using Blender. So this in its entirety is our sequence that we need to export in order for this pose to work in IMVU. So this is an additional step that's needed for Blender that you don't need to do with Deliverance's sticker. So to make sure that we've actually made what we can do next. So we have the sequence. So this is our sequence. And that by default was idle.pose. What we can do is click in here and rename this. Let's just call this coof.pose to distinguish it from the defaults that are included. Doesn't matter if we're overriding one of the defaults, that's fine. So that's our sequence. Let's save this. Save as. And then export. And that's all we need to do for a pose. We don't need to do anything else. All we do is just literally just pose the skeleton. So we're selecting our bones, manipulating them into position. Oh, and it's locked up again. I can tell this is going to be very annoying. But at least we have our file point, not file point, restore point. So that's our pose. So we're going to export this now. So File, Export, FBX. That'll bring up another file dialog where you do the same sort of thing again. We've got our hard drives, system locations, and then recent. So we're in the folder that we need to be in already, which is this folder selected. We can keep the file name, but on the right side here we've got a set of options that we need to set. So for what we're doing, we're exporting essentially an animation. Even though it's going to be a static pose, it's an animation nonetheless. So we want selected objects. Everything else is okay. In geometry, that's all right. Armature, always disable add leaf bones. And then as this is an animated file, we want bake animations, so expand the options, and we want to always disable add leaf bones and force start end keying. So disable those two. Everything else is okay, so double check and then export. So that's our FBX exported. So now we need IMVU. So we're going to do this in Classic and Studio, just to go through the process of exporting for those, for both of them. So, create mode. derive new product. Do that click. Empty derivables, female clothing. Go. So that's what we're going to modify. So now we want to import the FBX. So FBX import, load FBX, browse to our file. What did we call it? Coof. There it is. Coof pose 3. Open. So, because we're exporting a static pose, and it's essentially just skeleton data or skeletal data, IMVU doesn't see any meshes with this. Oh, that's a different error. Error, FBX contains no skeletal hierarchies. Abort. Okay, so let's try that again. That's probably because what we need to do, make sure one of the bones is selected. So do that again. Select all. Export FBX. So when you get that sort of problem occurring, disable selected objects. Everything else is okay. Geometry, that's all right. Armature, that's okay. Obviously, disable add leaf bones. Bake animation. Disable NLA strips. Start end keying. So that's okay. Just save over the top of that one that we just saved. And then re-import. So FBX import, load FBX. Let's see if this works. Yes, so that worked. So that's something to be aware of when you're exporting files from Blender. Sometimes it'll work, other times it doesn't. If it doesn't, or when it doesn't, just deselect the selected objects option. And what that does is it'll force Blender to export everything that's in the scene. And that way what you can then do is just filter out the bits that we don't need and include the bits that we do. So that's what's happened here. So we exported it properly, inverted commas, before, and that didn't work as an export. It didn't find the animation information that's included with the skeleton. But when we export the entire scene content, so it's exporting everything, it does. And that will then drop us straight into the importer. So this might be slightly different depending on which starter file you are using, because sometimes, depending on the earlier starter files, what you'll sometimes get, or what you'll typically get, is a pop-up screen that gives you some options to setting the skeleton. It's called, what is it called? Set skeleton root. So a lot of the videos include that option. So we discovered why that occurs, made a change, and that now means that we can generally just drop the file straight into the importer. It doesn't give you the set skeleton option, or it doesn't always give you the option. So what we have now is the importer. So that's this section on the right. What it gives us is our scale. We can ignore these. The avatar mesh, any materials that have been brought in, and then our actual sequences, our poses. And the one that we want is coof.pose. So our settings for importing, apply scale, that's always going to be 0.01. We don't need the mesh. So deselect, and that automatically deselects the materials. And then we can just leave these because we want both of them. Well, we only want the one, but we can leave both of them in. And then just import. Conversion success, because what that's done is it's converted the FBX file into, in this case, XAF files. Import changes, and then just apply changes. And that what we want next is to set up an action. So actions, add, and we want this to be a, let's try default pose. So stance dot uppercase I DLE. So stance dot idle, type avatar. After playing, play the same ensemble. And then down in the bottom here, we have our ensembles. And so an action split into two parts. There's the action which acts as a container for the ensembles. And the ensembles are basically different sequences. So we can have a number of different sequences. That's our animations that it can play through if we use those settings, but we've only got the one. So right, so our settings for this: skeletal animation, click the drop down, and we want coof.pose. So select composition, we need to set that to replace, and then our loops, loop start and end. So we want loops infinite, so that's 0. Loop start frame 1, and then we can do frame 2. So essentially all we're doing is playing one frame. So frame 1 to 2, so that's just a single frame, but it's going to loop infinitely. And then just apply change. Has it done it? Coof. Oh, is this the trigger? We have to use a trigger. Let's just call this coof. Sometimes, so let's try to type coof. Oh, my arms are broke. She is doing it, but there we go. So that's the pose, and her hand isn't supposed to be in her face, but and that wrist is awfully twisted. So this is one of the issues with drive new product 10,945,930. So I want to show you something. That's the empty mood. So let's just get the female clothing derivable out. So these are the two starter files. So this is the empty mood, and this is the standard clothing starter file. People normally derive from the clothing starter file. So let's just go through that process again and see if there's a difference. 0.01, don't need that. Those are okay. Import changes, apply changes, actions, add. Can't remember if you can still do this with so 0, frame 1 to frame 2. apply changes. So, you see how that works, but it didn't with this. And that's because this is the clothing starter file. If you use this file for your poses, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of poses don't work, because they're derived from the empty derivables or the avatar. Where is it? 80 or 191. So if you're having problems, let's cancel that. If you're having problems with the pose after you've imported it, and you get all sorts of funny things going on, it's likely because you've derived from the empty clothing file. Because if you do that, the pose that you bring in doesn't override the defaults that the avatar is playing through, essentially. So what happens is that if a bone doesn't include a specific pose, so we've essentially just modified what's that? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 12 bones. I think there are something like 80 or 90 bones in the avatar. So we've only modified 12 of them. So that means that there's only animation data for 12 of the bones. So if you drop that on top of the clothing starter file, the avatar will still animate the remaining, what is that, 70, 60 plus bones. It'll still animate it using the default animations that are associated with the avatar. So you end up with, which one was it? This myxomatosis, where the avatar is doing things you don't expect it to, because the default animations, so let's just do a actions. These, all of these. If you want to use the avatar file, whether that's the actual avatar file itself or the clothing avatar file, your animations are unlikely to work properly because they're not overriding all of these poses. And what IMVU will do is mix them together. So it'll mix your pose with all of these. So be aware of that. So ideally, you want to be deriving from the empty mood. And that is 10 million, I'll just type this in chat, 945,930. So that is, let me find the, just drop these links in. Product link. Where is that? Let me find that first. Okay, so let's go to IMVU. And shop. $945,930. Right, so this is the product that you want to be deriving from. Oh, hi, Emir. What coins? You mean credits or the new V coins? So that's the item that you want to be deriving from, the empty mood, to make sure or to ensure that your pose is more or less going to be what you created in Blender. So keep an eye out for that. When you're deriving your... So it doesn't allow us, that's the thing as well. It doesn't allow us, stance.idle. If you use the avatar file or the clothing file, stance.idle can't be overridden. If you use the empty mood, it can. So be aware of that. But that is creating a pose, a static pose for IMVU using the alternative pose starter file in Blender 2.83. If we want to do this in 2.9 plus, because there are differences, so we've got 2.91. So we'll just open the file that we just created and just re-export that using 9.1. Because there are slight differences. So let's open the file, open. So we're browsing to the location. Going to find the file. There it is, Coof to Coof 3. So pose, open. So that's the pose. Same pose, same file. So we can open that into Blender 2.91 because it was created with 2.83. We can't go backwards because we'll lose data. So what we want to do here, same thing again, just export. So file, export, FBX. So that's all we're doing with this. Whoops. Same dialog again, but the options are slightly different, or they're organized in a slightly different way. So we'll keep selected objects deselected because we want to export everything in the scene. All the other bits are okay. Geometry, modifiers, that's all right. Armature, again, always disable add leaf bones. And then animation, disable NLA strips and force start end keying. Let's just call this 3B. Folder location's okay. Double check and then export. So we can bring that in 10.945.930. So that's what we're overriding. FBX import, load FBX. Coof 3B. Same again, 0.01. No avatar, disable materials, poses, that's okay. So import changes, apply changes, and then set up our action. Add stance.idle avatar, same ensemble, coof pose, composition, replace, loops, infinite, loop start 1, loop end 2. So again, we're just playing the one single frame. Apply changes, and there is our pose. So that's classic. So what we're going to do is use Studio. See how that works. Right, so this is Studio. We're going to create a new project, so click the Create button. Is there any updates? No updates, that's okay. So on the right, we've got a preview of what's generally selected by default, which is the empty derivable, but we want a specific product for this. So product ID is 10,945,930. Enter. That gives us the empty mood. That's what we want. Click Derive. So this is slightly different because the avatar is still posing, but it's a slightly different fixed. Oh, it's not fixed pose. So how to be careful with this, because it might not do the same thing. So let's import hamburger, edit, import. Browse to our FBX. Coof, doesn't matter which one. Open. So this is the import process. So it's giving us a preview of what's going to be included that we can then edit. So this is what's been found in the file. So what we want is set up FBX. So click that. As with Classic, we want to change the scale 0.01. We don't need this, so we can deselect that. No meshes. We can ignore this because it's brought in the thing that we need, which is 87 bones, 1 mesh. Right, 0.01. Next. No materials. Next. Those are the animations we want. So preview, or not preview, review. That's what's going to be brought in. And then import. Right, so it's brought in our assets. So we've got coof.pose and jump.pose. So coof is the one that we created, obviously. Jump being the one that's included in the starter file. So to create a pose in IMVU, we want to switch to component, and then we've got material, mesh, and then action. And this is what we want. This is where we create our actions. So there aren't any actions listed. So click on the plus button to create one. That creates one called New Action. And here we've got Name Trigger on the right here. So we amend this to, let's see if this will work, stance.idle. That becomes the name of the animation and the trigger. So that's named the action. Next, we want to add an ensemble. So click the plus button and this pop-up appears. So we don't have any morph animation, we just have skeletal animation. So we should have, when we click on this, our sequence listed, which is coof.pose. So the options update, we want loops set to 0 for infinite, then start frame 1, start frame 2. We want replace set, that's okay. Disable gaze. Everything else is okay. And then apply. And then to test this, no, this is stance.idle, so we just click the preview button. Aha, and this is what people are complaining about. So this is a bug. So what should happen is the avatar's arm does the whole koofy cough thing. But doing this means there's a problem somewhere. So that's okay. Let's try jump. No sound ensembles, that's okay. So yes, there's a problem somewhere. So congratulations, we've discovered an issue. So what that should have done, as we were just saying, is that should have automatically played the pose with the avatar's hands at its mouth, but it's done this instead. It's done this reset pose. I suspect that is because let's just create a new project. Let's see what happens with the empty clothing. So select, derive, go through the same process again, edit, import, where's coof? Set up FBX. So let's just go through the same process again, but this time we're deriving from, that's okay. Disable. Oops, no, we want those. View, import. So our assets are in. So we need to switch to component. New action. Stance.idle. enter new ensemble. It could be that, so we want infinite loops, frame 1, frame 2, replace, apply, preview. So it could be, let's try a trigger. Right, so we've fixed the problem, or at least we've identified the problem. So in Classic, in Classic, default mood has the animation stripped out of it. In Studio, it doesn't. And of course that now means, so what happens if we switch this then? Coof. Then do coof. So we're testing the, oh, that didn't do anything. So that's what we use down at the bottom here to test our poses. So that's not done anything. So there's an issue because the default state of the avatar when it's loaded in as a mood product is animated. And that is breaking our poses because the defaults are not being overridden properly. And that's resetting the avatar to this pose. Whereas in Classic, it plays the pose properly. So for the time being, it's probably a good idea to use Classic for your poses to make sure that they work properly. But all of those technical issues aside, because obviously this is beta software, IMVU Studio Beta, notwithstanding all of that, that is how you create a pose in Blender using the starter file. So obviously it's different to Deliverance's pose creator flash sticker, but it's similar enough in terms of how you actually do it. So you're just selecting individual bones and posing them using the widget to manipulate the bones. That creates your keyframes or marks your frames or poses into the timeline. So you create a short sequence, duplicate the actual pose that you want, and then strip it of any pose data. In fact, actually what we can do with that is double check. So select all. To do that, select all, pose, clear transform, all, and that'll strip all the information. And this is what's needed to get a successful pose out of Blender. But the process of creating the pose is pretty much identical to how you do it in the sticker. But we'll call it quits there for now, because that's don't want to go too long. But just grab the starter files. I'll just grab those again. Where are they? starter files, and just play around with it and see what you can come up with. But it's pretty straightforward once you get used to just the process. The tricky bit, in fact, actually the difficulty or the challenge with poses is not making a pose, but making the pose look representative of whatever it is that you're trying to show off. So making the avatar look like it's properly koofing into its hands is the challenge, not posing the bones particularly. So just trial and error, play around and see what you can come up with. Might just upload these files as example files that can be played around with. Yes, we'll see if I can do that. Right, so we'll call it quits there, and we'll see you on the next unscheduled video, whenever that is. Right, so bye for now. Oh, thanks for lurking lurkers, thanks for watching watchers, and thanks for subscriptions for those that have done it on Twitch and the various other programs, platforms I should say. So, bye for now.